Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode here on Bully Whispers. We are here today to run down the 12 scenes that define the TV series The Wire. Spoiler alert, it is not one of the scenes playing during this intro. So let's go ahead and get started with one of the most referenced scenes in the show, at least in terms of analogies, the chess scene from Season 1. Now personally, I don't like the chess parallel for two main reasons, both of which are fundamental principles in driving the direction of the show. However, when viewed through the right lens, a more accurate picture comes into focus. First, chess pieces don't have free will. They do what they are told, when they are told. And second, in real life, games are never one-on-one between two people with equal pieces. There are always multiple opponents from all angles, each of them possessing different pieces with different abilities and skill levels at their disposal. Even the most famous quote from this scene,
"See the king, stay the king,"
is ridiculous at face value. After all, if the king stayed the king, then Marlo wouldn't have been able to turn himself into a pawn at the end of the series. However, keeping in mind that there are always multiple games going on, just like everyone is the main character of their own life story, everyone is the king of their own chessboard, even if they are just a pawn on someone else's. Your rook may be their bishop, her bishop may be your queen, and your queen may be his side piece, but everyone is king of their own board, which is why our second defining scene, or in this case, quote, rings so true.
It's always going to be a Marlo, man. No Marlo, no game.
This is a concept that is central to the show, and it doesn't only apply to the drug trade. We see it in all other areas as well, from Rawls wanting Burrell's spot to Carcetti wanting Royce's, and once they get it,
Nah, man, there's games beyond the fucking game.
they soon realize that there are more boards to conquer. In fact, the closest thing the show has to what could be considered a king by everyone would be the Greeks, but they also represent something else. The source or origin of a problem, which brings us to our third defining moment.
And you? To them, you're only the Greek.
And of course, I'm not even Greek.
We don't really know what the true origin or source of our problems are, and to a decent extent, this show attempts to trace these problems back to their origins. So, as the saying goes, let's follow the money, which brings us to our fourth defining moment.
You follow drugs, you get drug addicts and drug dealers. But you start to follow the money, and you don't know where the fuck it's gonna take you.
The fact that the money goes everywhere shows that the scope of the search must be widened significantly. There isn't going to be some singular, malevolent force of evil behind all of the problems, a concept which is further clarified by our fifth defining scene.
All the pieces matter.
And this is where the show acknowledges how interconnected everything is. Now, while Lester is speaking in terms of putting together a drug case, the show expands the scope to show how this concept is applicable to things such as politicians, the school system, and the media as well. Is it the junkies' fault? Well, no, you don't really know what their situation was growing up. Is it the corner kids' fault? Well, they may not have had very many options because the schools don't prepare them for much. Is it the school's fault? Well, no, because they have to meet test requirements, and so on and so on. With the principle that everything, and therefore by extension everyone, is connected, the question soon becomes, well, then what does everyone want? Which brings us to our sixth defining moment.
You know, I'm just a gangster, I suppose. And I want my corners.
Everyone wants their corners, but not everyone views their corners in terms of city blocks like Avon does. For example, in terms of the type of big businesses that Stringer was trying to emulate, their version of street corners is market share, and you better believe that Apple and Microsoft will fight for their share of the market. The only difference is how they do it, which brings us to our seventh defining scene.
I got the shotgun. You got the briefcase. It's on the game, though, right?
In one of Omar's many memorable scenes, he points out that Levy is profiting off the same drug trade that he is, and demonizing him while doing so. Now, I would like to take a second to point out that everyone has a right to legal representation no matter what they are charged with. So, just because a lawyer is representing someone with drug charges doesn't make it fair to paint him with the same brush as Levy in terms of profiting off the drug trade. However, since Levy is dirty as can be, I think the accusation from Omar is warranted. That being said, the basic premise behind Omar's statement is quite sound. Different people use different methods to get their corners. So, how do the people who aren't involved in the underworld, the legitimate people, how did they get their corners? Well, just ask Prez and he will tell you in our eighth defining scene.
making robberies into larcenies, making rapes disappear. You juke the stats, and majors become colonels.
By juking the numbers to make yourself look better than you are. This is a practice that is seen throughout the show, from the cops with the crime stats to the schools with the test scores, and even the politicians who push those actions so that their own stats don't drop in the polls. Ironically, the most honest and straightforward business in the show when it comes to the numbers is the drug business. Now, while you may have some people stealing from you here and there, cold hard cash is much more tangible than the abstract stats that the others use, and if your numbers drop, someone like Marlo will send someone like Chris to pay you a visit. Anyways, now that the police, politicians, etc. have juked their stats and made themselves look better, what good does it do them if nobody knows? Well, that brings us to our next defining scene.
I'm putting it out front. I think you really captured the disparity of the two worlds in the city in a highly readable narrative. I wouldn't change a word.
This is a scene that has far more significance in real life than we ever get to see on the show because, like Plato said, those who tell stories rule society. However, within the context of the show, I think it's great that out of all the fabrications we see take place between the police and the politicians, the one the media chooses to pick up and run with is by far the craziest of them all. Let's be honest here. If we are putting ourselves in the shoes of these characters, as cops or politicians, if backed into a corner, and even if you wouldn't actually do it, the thought of juking the stats would probably cross most of our minds at least briefly. On the other hand, how many of you think that the idea of faking a serial killer and putting bite marks on dead people as proof would ever cross your mind? Interestingly enough, something loosely similar to this did happen in real life with a smiley face killer, but anyways, it's sensational stories like this that grab attention, and Scott Templeton wants his corners. So he adds further fabrication onto something that's already fabricated in order to push it harder. Of course, the newspaper wants its corners too, so despite questions regarding the legitimacy of the story, the newspaper goes forward with it. So between everybody being king of their own chessboard and going after their corners, it's no surprise that despite the multiple systems in place, as well as many good people who genuinely want to help, some people just fall through the cracks.
You gonna look out for me?
Randy, as well as Dukie, provide some of the saddest examples of how kids can slip through the cracks, and they are also where we circle back to the previously asked questions of, is it the junkie's fault, and is it the corner kid's fault? Now, while The Wire does a tremendous job showing how circular everything is, as well as how easy it is to fall down, the 11th scene on our list is significant because it shows that even if you fall down, you can get back up, which brings us to Bubbles rejoining his family upstairs, except that's not where I'm going with this. Frankly, if that's all there was to it, that he stayed clean long enough to go upstairs, then I would have found it to be a cheesy, cliche ending, but there was more to it than that. The real significance in Bubbles' redemption story is shown in the speech he gives during the previous episode. In his speech, he shows how easy it is to fall down, how hard it is to get back up, and by bringing up Sherrod, he reminds us that a lot of people don't. It's just an unavoidable fact of life, and speaking of unavoidable facts of life, that brings us to our 12th scene on the list, which shows us nobody does dumb shit like drunk white people. Well, thanks for watching this episode here on Bully Whispers. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next score.